When the German economy collapsed, democracy collapsed with it, and the world's most dangerous political movement rose from the ruins. Germany entered the early 1920s already wounded, but no one could imagine how quickly the wound would turn gangrenous. By 1921, the reparations bill imposed at Versailles had become a crushing weight. 132 billion gold marks, deliberately set, beyond Germany's realistic capacity to pay. The Allies insisted on coal, timber, industrial goods, and gold-backed payments. Germany, exhausted and politically fractured, struggled to keep up, and in 1923, the crisis broke open. The trigger was the Ruhr. When Germany fell behind on reparations deliveries, France and Belgium sent troops to occupy the Ruhr industrial region, the heart of German coal and steel production. Their goal was simple: extract what Germany owed by force. Their method ignited a disaster. The German government responded with a strategy of passive resistance, encouraging workers to strike rather than cooperate with the occupiers. Mines shut down. Factories froze. Trains stopped. And while this nonviolent defiance rallied public support, it also suffocated the German economy. As workers refused to operate the Ruhr machinery, Berlin promised to pay them anyway. But with revenues collapsing and foreign exchange evaporating, there was only one way to meet those promises: printing money on a scale unseen in modern Europe. At first it seemed manageable. Then it spun into madness. Between early 1923 and late 1923, the German mark collapsed with suicidal speed. What cost 100 marks one week could cost 5,000 slars the next, then 1,000,000, then 1,000,000,000. Money lost value between sunrise and sunset. Housewives rushed to markets at dawn because prices at noon would be unrecognizable. Workers demanded wages twice a day so they could spend their earnings before they evaporated into nothing. Restaurants stopped listing prices by the time menus were printed. They were already outdated. From the outside, hyperinflation sounded like an academic term. Inside Germany, it was a lived catastrophe. Families who had saved for decades, teachers, clerks, civil servants, saw their life savings turn into paper scraps. Middle-class respectability dissolved overnight. A loaf of bread that once cost less than a mark rose to 200 billion marks by November 1923. Children played with stacks of banknotes as if they were building blocks. People burned bundles of currency for heat because it was cheaper than firewood. The psychological toll was even greater. Germans felt humiliated, trapped in a nightmare, betrayed by the government, by the Allies, by fate itself. The elites blamed the workers. The workers blamed the elites. Conservatives blamed the Republic. Radicals blamed the treaty. Anti-Semitic conspiracies spread in dark corners. Fueled by desperation and manipulated by extremist agitators who insisted that Germany had been stabbed in the back. Meanwhile, political violence surged. Militias marched openly in the streets. The left and right battled in city squares. Armed uprisings erupted in Saxony and Thuringia. Private armies formed from veterans who refused to accept the new democratic order. The Weimar Republic, barely 4 years old, seemed on the verge of collapse. And then, in Bavaria, a small but increasingly loud nationalist movement sensed its chance. The chaos in Berlin, the collapse of the currency, the anger in the streets, all of it created the perfect conditions for extremists to claim that only a strong hand could restore Germany. It was in this climate that Adolf Hitler, the leader of a fringe party, believed his moment had arrived. By late 1923, the desperation reached its peak. Hyperinflation had destroyed the economy. Social trust had evaporated. Violence paralyzed politics. Germany was broken, and when a nation is broken, it becomes vulnerable to those who claim they alone can rebuild it. The crisis finally ended only when a new currency, the Rentenmark, was introduced, and passive resistance in the Ruhr was halted. But the damage was permanent. Millions now believed democracy had failed them. Extremists had tasted opportunity, and they had no intention of letting it slip away. Hyperinflation did not bring Hitler to power, but it taught him something crucial. Germany could be moved by fear faster than by hope, and the next crisis would be even worse. By the mid-1920s, Germany had survived hyperinflation, but it had not healed. The introduction of the Rentenmark stabilized the currency. Foreign loans flowed in through the Dawes Plan, and for a few short years, the Weimar Republic appeared to recover. Streets were calmer. Factories reopened. Culture flourished. Berlin became a city of neon lights and artistic experimentation, a symbol of modern Europe. But beneath this surface, the political foundation remained fragile, cracked by bitterness, distrust, and a sense of national humiliation that no amount of prosperity could erase. The old conservative elite, the military leadership, and large landowners never fully accepted the republic created in 1919. To them, democracy was not a triumph, but a defeat. Prussian generals resented civilian authority. Industrial magnates distrusted workers' rights legislation. Nationalists despised the Treaty of Versailles, yet blamed Republican politicians for signing it. The Republic existed, but many of its pillars refused to support it. On the opposite end, the radical left rejected the Republic for entirely different reasons. Communists, inspired by the Soviet Revolution, believed parliamentarism was a betrayal of the working class. They saw capitalism as the true enemy and insisted the only path forward was revolution. Their leaders instructed members to treat social democrats, moderate reformists, as social fascists, splitting the left into two hostile camps. This division would haunt Germany for the next decade. Between these extremes sat ordinary Germans, factory workers, teachers, veterans, clerks, small business owners. They watched political parties bicker in Parliament while their wages stagnated, taxes rose, and the trauma of 1923 lingered in their memory. They were not extremists by nature, but they were exhausted by instability. Democracy felt complicated, ineffective, easily manipulated. And extremist parties thrive not when people believe in them, but when people stop believing in anything else. Paramilitary violence strengthened the political extremes. The Communist Party marched with its Red Front fighters. The right-wing nationalist groups trained in secret camps, stockpiling weapons. And in Bavaria, one party stood out for its mixture of fanatic discipline, theatrical rallies, and aggressive propaganda. The National Socialist German Workers' Party, the NSDAP. After the failed beer hall putsch in 1923, Hitler had spent his time in prison, writing, planning, and thinking. He emerged with a new strategy. Instead of trying to overthrow the state by force, he would destroy it from within. The Nazis would use elections, propaganda, and street intimidation simultaneously. They would present themselves as the only movement capable of restoring unity and national pride. But in the mid-1920s, the Nazis remained small. Germany was stabilizing, foreign investment was returning, and voters were not yet desperate enough to turn toward extremism. In the 1928 election, the NSDAP won just 2/6 of the vote, barely a footnote in national politics. Still, the seeds were planted. The party built local branches in rural areas, recruited unemployed veterans, and created a propaganda machine, unlike anything Germany had seen. Cheap newspapers, mass rallies, coordinated posters, and simple slogans. One people, one nation, helped them grow a loyal base. Their message was clear. Blame the elites. Blame the Republic. Blame the treaty. Blame the enemies within. At the same time, nationalist conservatives made a fateful mistake. They believed they could use the Nazis. Some saw Hitler as a blunt instrument, dangerous, but controllable. Others thought his movement would weaken the left. A few genuinely admired the energy and discipline of his followers. These elites did not view Hitler as a future dictator. They viewed him as a tool. They would learn too late that tools can turn into weapons. By 1929, extremist politics had carved deep trenches in German society. The Weimar Republic was surrounded on both sides, revolutionary communists to the left, militant nationalists to the right, and trapped between them, a fragmented center that struggled to cooperate. And then came the event that would transform extremism from a fringe threat into a national force: the collapse of the world economy. In the final days before the crash, Germany was a nation held together by borrowed money and fragile optimism. Once that support vanished, nothing would prevent the extremes from rising. Not the Republic, not the old elites, not foreign diplomacy. The stage was set. The center would fall. The extremes would fight for control, and one of them would win. By 1929, Germany remained a democracy on paper, but the system was weakening. Its structure was fragile. Too many parties, too many ideological divides, and too little trust in the very idea of parliamentary rule. Yet the Republic still functioned until the world economy collapsed under its feet. The Great Depression hit Germany harder than almost any other nation. American loans, which had rebuilt German industry, vanished almost overnight. Factories shut down. Banks froze. Millions were thrown out of work. By 1932, unemployment reached nearly 30%, one of the highest rates recorded in an industrialized nation. Men lined up outside job centers that had nothing to offer. Families sold furniture just to buy food. The middle class, already damaged by hyperinflation, now faced total ruin. In such conditions, democracy faced a nearly impossible task. Parliament, already divided, became paralyzed. Coalition governments collapsed one after another. Parties refused to compromise, preferring ideological purity to practical solutions. The Social Democrats defended social welfare. The conservatives demanded austerity. The liberals splintered. The communists called for revolution. And the Nazis shouted from every podium that democracy was weak, cowardly, and incapable of protecting the German people. The real turning point came when President Paul von Hindenburg began using Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution. This article allowed the president to rule by emergency decree when the country faced instability. What had been designed as an emergency tool became the new normal. Chancellor Heinrich Brüning, unable to pass laws through Parliament, increasingly relied on presidential decrees to govern. In effect, Germany began sliding into a system where the president, not the elected parliament, held the decisive authority. This shift was subtle but deadly. Once parliamentary democracy is bypassed, even legally, it becomes easier to ignore, then weaken, then replace. The Nazis understood this perfectly. They rebranded themselves as the Party of National Renewal, not just of rage. Their message was simple. Democracy had failed. The elites were incompetent, and only a strong government could rescue Germany. Their rallies grew larger. Their symbols became familiar nationwide. Their paramilitary wing, the SA, marched through towns with flags and drums, projecting strength that many Germans found appealing in a time of chaos. By 1930, the political center was collapsing. In the national elections of that year, the Nazis leapt from marginal obscurity to becoming the second largest party in the Reichstag. The communists also surged. The middle shrank. Parliament turned into a battlefield of ideologies that could not work together. Government now moved almost entirely through presidential decrees, a dangerous erosion of democratic norms. Each decree weakened the authority of Parliament, making voters even more cynical about democracy as a whole. The Republic still existed, but it no longer governed. Brüning attempted drastic austerity measures to stabilize the economy, but these only deepened the suffering of ordinary Germans. As hunger and homelessness spread, so did anger. Brüning lost support, including from conservative elites who had once backed him. In 1932, he was dismissed. His replacement, Franz von Papen, governed with even less legitimacy. He dissolved the Prussian state government, used emergency powers freely, and encouraged cooperation with the Nazis, believing he could manipulate them for conservative goals. It was a fatal miscalculation. Meanwhile, street violence escalated to near civil war. Clashes between communist fighters and Nazi stormtroopers erupted almost daily. Police struggled to maintain control. For many Germans, democracy had become synonymous with disorder. In the presidential election of 1932, Hitler challenged Hindenburg. He lost, but the message was clear. Millions saw him as the man with answers. By the end of 1932, Germany's parliamentary system was virtually dead. The Reichstag barely met. Emergency decrees dictated national policy. The political center was shattered. The economy remained in ruins, and the Nazis continued to grow. When the final crisis came, the backroom deals, the political bargaining, the underestimation of Hitler, the Republic had no strength left to defend itself. It had already hollowed out from within. The collapse of parliamentary democracy did not begin with Hitler. It began with economic despair, political arrogance, institutional weakness, and the slow normalization of emergency powers. When the door finally opened for Hitler in January 1933, he stepped into a house that was already burning.